Whether you're driving a street car or a race car like Mustang here, it's important to know what's happening under the hood. Now today's modern Mustangs, the gauges have gotten much better, but only a few years ago, the factory gauges were an estimate at best. So today we're going to upgrade the gauges in Mustang with a custom dash from Classic Dash. This custom kit from Classic Dash is going to fit your 1994 through 2004 Mustang, but we have kits available all the way back to 1965. Now the kit is going to include the bezel itself, which will replace your factory dash bezel, and then your choice of gauges. You can buy just the bezel or buy it as a kit, which includes everything necessary for installation. Our kit is going to include the AutoMeter ProComp Ultra-Lite gauges, and you're getting a speedometer, tachometer, fuel gauge, oil pressure gauge, temp gauge, and a voltage gauge. It includes all necessary wiring for installation, also makes the dash removable. So once you install this on the cluster, you'll have a harness that connects to the gauges, and then a separate harness that connects to the car, so if you have to remove it for service, it makes it very easy to do. The harnesses included in the kit are color coordinated and come with detailed instructions on how to hook up everything. Like I said, you have a car side harness, a gauge side harness, your speedometer. We even have all the grounding kits and LED lights. The LED is going to be for your high beams and your turn signals. Now with this kit, you will have to disable PATs to use it. That can be done with any custom tuner. First thing you want to do is disconnect the battery, and then you're going to pull your headlight switch out. There's a little metal tab right in this opening at the bottom. Push and pop that off. Now we're going to remove the two screws located underneath here. They're going to be small little torque screws. Now you can kind of pull up on this and pop it free. Now there's 4 screws that hold the cluster in, one on each corner. Now the next part's gonna be a little bit tricky. There's 2 wiring harnesses we have to unplug to get the cluster out. So you sort of have to maneuver it until you can get your hand behind there and get to the harnesses. Usually easier from the bottom. And remove the factory cluster. Just for the hell of it, we're just going to throw this in real quick. Just want to get an idea of what it's going to look like when it's in the car. It's going to be 2 brackets for these bottom screws and the factory ones in the top, but that's going to look a lot better than the factory, and a lot better instruments as well. All right, now we're ready to actually start the assembly of our Classic Dash cluster. Now what you want to do here, first is grab this wiring harness here. Now it's 2 wiring harnesses. This is the gauge side harness. The easiest way to tell, all these terminals are already installed on this side. This is the one that's going to basically go to the cluster and connect to all of your gauges. The other one, which we'll leave in the bag from now, is the other side of this. This will connect to here, making the cluster removable, and these are going to go out to get all the signals from the car. We'll get to this one definitely later. The first thing you want to do is open this up, get an idea of what the colors are. I'll give you a nice photo here of an overview. It tells you all the different colors. And if you're more on the engineering side, you actually have schematics and diagrams on the next page. And they actually go into each individual gauge and tell you what wires should be connected to it. They make this really as easy as possible. Even if you don't really know what you're doing, all the wires are labeled with where they go. Now when you assemble the cluster, you can put the gauges pretty much wherever you want them to be. So figure out either ahead of time or just go as you go. I'm going to start off with the tachometer. Now in case you're wondering, because you're probably going to ask, why am I installing a tachometer when my car already has a big tachometer in it? I probably will eventually get rid of the monster tach. That way I can just keep an in-dash tach and a shift light on the car. Okay, on the tachometer, there's 2 changes you may have to make before you install it. Now if you have a V8 engine and want these to light up just a normal white light, this is ready to go. If you have a V6 or you have a 4-cylinder, you have to pop this cover off, or if you want to change the color of the light, which I do want to do. Basically pop this off. If you look down in here, the middle piece there is where the bulb is, but off to the side, you'll see the switches. There's 2 switches. For a V8 car, they both go up. For a V6 or a 4-cylinder, one goes up, one goes down. The instructions explain which to do. But again, if you're putting in a V8 Mustang, which most of you probably are, make sure both those switches are up. To remove the bulb, just turn and pull. And put the little red condom on, supplied by AutoMeter. That's what they call it. Don't laugh, Justin. And lock it back into place. I'm going to go with, it's on the left side over here. Sometimes this will be a tight fit. Put the retainer on the back. Get it snug, it's plastic, you don't have to crank it down too much. Need to reinstall that cap as well. Okay, and then repeat the process with the other gauges. Now we're going to start wiring the gauges. Since the cluster is face down, I took one of the boxes, just cut it open, and just gave myself a little cheat sheet so I know what the back of the gauge is when we're making the connections, so I don't have to keep flipping it back over. If you look down here, they made this even easier. All the wires that don't have a zip tie will be connections we have to make later. Then each of the gauges has its own zip tied cluster. So we'll start with this one here. That's ground. Gauge light, 12 volt ignition, and then water temp. So we know that's our water temp gauge. We'll hook that up first. And on the back of all these short sweep gauges, well, most of them anyway, except for the actual voltage gauge, you have 3 connections, SI and ground. S is going to be your sender. That goes out to the sending unit, which will be our colored wire. Ground is ground. Then I is ignition. That's your 12 volt feed. So the pink ignition goes to I for ignition. Ground is our signal wire, so that goes to the S for signal. And ground goes right in the middle. Since we're on this side of the cluster, we'll do oil next. Again, we've got ground, ignition, the gray is the light, and then we have the blue, which says oil pressure right on it. That's our sender. Black is our ground. Pink is our ignition. Next is a speedometer. That'll be a VSS signal for vehicle speed. Grab the harness with the VSS. And this one, they're labeled up top here. So signal goes here. 12 volt goes right below it. I'll now do the tach. Tach receives its signal from the coil wire, so grab coil. 12 volts. And ground. Fuel again is a 4-wire. It literally says gas gauge on there for the signal. Last one only has 3 wires because voltage doesn't have a signal. The wire actually is the signal on its own. All right, on each of the 4 auxiliary gauges here, twist the wire up, put some heat shrink over them, and grab one of the supplied male terminals. And crimp them on. Heat shrink up. Get a heat source and melt it on there. Now grab the extra gauge light wire, which is gray. Take the white one. Push them together. Now you have to carefully remove the ground. Grab one of the ground plugs. Put that on the outside terminal. Push that on the gauge and connect the ground. We'll do that for all 4 auxiliary gauges. All right, now that the other lights are hooked up, the last 2 go to the lamp connections right on the back of the speedometer and tachometer. All right, the gauge is wired up to the cluster. Now we're going to work on our LED auxiliary lights. Now these are going to be for turn signals, parking light, and for your high beam indicator. So the 2 greens are turn signals, and you have a red and amber. We're going to use the amber one for our high beam. The red's going to be for parking brake. Being this is a race car, it does not have a parking brake, so I will not be using this one, but it hooks up the same way the other 3 do. Now we're going to go dead center in here for our high beam, and the turn signals on the outside edge here. So figure out where you want it to go. I'll carefully drill the holes from the back side. And now we can insert these, put the wires through. It will be pretty tight. If you want to put a little glue on the back, you can. The shape of these connectors are really not going to go anywhere. All right, now we have to connect the LEDs to the harness. We have the 3 ground wires, then white and black stripe is our right turn signal. Our left turn signal is going to be the orange one here. And high beam is red. When you do the turn signals, make sure you have the orientation of the cluster correct. If you look at the back, it might throw you off. So spin it around. You know, this one's all the way on our left, but this is our right turn signal. We'll start with that. Go to the white and the ground. Now, a lot of you right now are going to go, why aren't you soldering this? By all means, if you want to solder, go right ahead. Manufacturer includes butt connectors, and I found for something like this, they usually are perfectly okay. Connect the signal wire to the LED. The last 3 wires here, start with the pink and the tan. Notice they have terminals you can remove. These are if you're running a factory parking light. These would go to that light. Since we're not using them, we're just going to simply disconnect them. I'll close those circuits off. And the last one is the chassis ground. Now our cluster is all wired up. The next thing we're going to do is now install the actual chassis side harness. Before we do so, we're going to connect this. Just give it a quick test, make sure everything works like it's supposed to. The wires we're going to grab are going to be the gauge light, the 12-volt switch, which is the pink wire, and the ground. That'll tell us if the gauges turn on, and also make them light up. And just connect them to a 12-volt battery. Sweet. Now that our cluster is assembled, the next step is the in-car wiring. Now this part, we're not going to go into as much detail because every car is actually going to be a little bit different. We're going to show you some of the specific things on this body style, and we're going to show you where everything's going to basically go. In the kit, you get your setting unit for water temp, setting unit for oil pressure. This is your speedometer signal sensor, and this is the wire. Now just like everything else on these cars, every wire is actually labeled with exactly where it goes. Basically, you just got to do is figure out where these connections have to be made and then connect this harness and it'll plug into your cluster. Like I said, we're installing this in my 96 Cobra that has a Coyote swap, so a lot of locations are going to be different, but we're going to show you where we put our sensors and you figure out where they'll make most sense on your engine. Now in my car, I already had an AutoMeter coolant temp and an AutoMeter oil pressure gauge installed, so the sensors are already here. What I did is put the coolant temp sensor right here. Now from the factory, a hose goes here to your overflow, but again, I didn't need that for this car. Using factory locations for sensors is fine because the sensor is in a good location. We just want to make sure we get the best thing we can for the higher quality gauges. All right, so there's 7 connections we can make right here at the 2 factory plugs. We're going to be able to plug in our ground wire, our gauge lights wire, our 12-volt ignition wire, fuel gauge wire, left turn signal, right turn signal, and then our high beam. So we went online and downloaded a wiring harness for this car to figure out which ones are, but we're going to double check some of them. First we're going to check is going to be our blinker. To do that, we can simply grab a test light, turn the hazards on. Okay, that is blinking, so that one is good. Next we'll check our high beam. Should be the second wire, the gray and white. Turn the high beams on. That one's good. Next we go to the red and green down here. Just going to be our 12-volt switched. Make sure we're on the right one. There we go. Okay, so that one's good. We can use this for the ground as well. You can see there's a black ground wire right in there. On this harness, white and blue, again will be a turn signal. One's good. And then blue, red for illumination. That one's good as well. Now in our case, I'm actually gonna hook the illumination up hot on switched because I want the gauges to light up red all the time like the other gauges in my car do. But if you do want to illuminate like normal, that's your connection right there. All right, so everything in the dash is now wired, but before the cluster can go in, we do have to drill out these 2 holes. Well, at least this one. In my case, this would be where the rear defroster goes. I'm going to delete that on my car since I don't use it anyway, but we do have to drill this out for the headlight switch. So before we put the cluster into the car, there's 2 other things we still have to do. First is going to be put these brackets in place. The way the cluster mounts uses the 2 factory top holes and these 2 small brackets. So we'll start with this one right here. The other one installs with a factory screw right over here. Okay, now we can put our cluster up in the place here. We do have this one additional ground. And you're going to fish that down to your dash and you can ground it underneath the dash. Plug it in. Make sure none of the small wires get stuck up top. Before we bolt everything down, you can try it, make sure everything works. All right, we got hazard lights. All the gauges light up. We'll start it up. Volts, fuel, tach, everything's good. All right, now we're going to install the factory hardware up top here. Now, a couple things under the car. The first one I'm going to show you here is the oil pressure. This is where that wire goes. We put the sending unit right into the factory location, and it's got our feed from there. The last part here we're going to have to sort of show you since we can't do it on my car. My car's got a blocked off plate where the speedometer would go, but it's going to go right here. Basically, this sending unit is going to bolt right onto there, and it's going to plug into the existing wiring. We'll show you that next. Now, this is the wiring harness from behind the cluster that connects to our speedometer sensor. What you're going to do is connect the pink 12 volt to the red, the yellow ground to the black, and the purple to the white, and that'll get your speedometer working. The classic dash cluster would be worth the installation just for looks alone, but thankfully it's a huge performance upgrade as well. Thanks to our AutoMeter gauges, we're going to know what's happening under the hood of our car, give us much more accurate information than the factory cluster does. And the wiring Classic provides makes this installation something that anybody who understands basic wiring can install on their own. As far as tools, really basic wiring tools, give yourself, I'd say about 5 or 6 hours, and be back on the road in no time.